All right, taking a look here at example number 1, you're going to have to bear with me as there is going to be a lot of back and forth with this because I'm going to need to zoom in to get a good look at our diagram. So before starting anything, it's really important to take notice and look at what's going on here in the diagram. With any box and whisker plot or box plot, I always recommend labeling those 5 numbers in your 5-number summary here. So that just tells me that these are my minimum values. This is my Q1 or quartile 1. Q2, aka the median, right? Those are the same, Q2 and the median. Quartile 3, and then last but not least, our maximum. Taking a few seconds to label those are going to make life a lot easier. Despite the blurriness and the crappy quality of my diagram here, you might notice that we're talking about test scores, that these are test scores for Mr. Scarlett's class and Mrs. Plum's class. That terribly awfully written blurry stuff over there that you totally can't see says n equals 21 and n equals 20. Those are not always given to you, and those just are the number of students in each class, or the number of numbers, meaning that there are 21 test scores for Mr. Scarlett and 20 test scores for Mrs. Plum. The last thing I want to point out is you can't get anything right if you're not sure about the scale and what it's going up by. So you can see that our scale here, we have every 10 marked, but what is it going up by? What are each one of these little hash marks representing? Or why are these hash marks here a little bit bigger than the rest of them? Hopefully, upon some looking and analyzing, you're realizing that each one of these little hash marks is going up by 1, and those extra bold ones in the middle are just representing the middle marks, or the 5s. So again, the more I write down, the less likely I am to make mistakes. Last but not least, I want to point out this area right here. This is what's called a break in the graph. And all that shows you is that we skipped a bunch of numbers to go from 0 to start at 50. That's all that means, is we skipped a lot of numbers in between there. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the questions that it's actually asking me to find now. Question A wants to know, no. Yep. Okay. Question A wants to know, and this is where your highlighter is going to come in handy. What percent of Mrs. Plum's class scored above a 91? So Mrs. Plum is the pink one. Make sure you're looking at the right graph. Above a 91. 91 starts like right about here, and above that would be from here to here. So what percentage that? From Q3 to the maximum, those percentages, remember each one of those sections, each one of those groups that we're breaking it up into is representing 25%. So what percent scored above 91? 25%. What percent of Mr. Scarlett's class scored below a 78? So I'm going to get a different color highlighter. Below a 78, 75, 6, 7, 8. So 78 looks like that's the median for Mr. Scarlett. Below that would be lower. What percent does that have? From the minimum to Q1, that's 25%. But then we have another 25% going from Q1 to Q2, giving me the total of 50%. Your highest and your lowest score, your minimum and your maximum score. Your max score, you can see both teachers had the same max score, and that was a 98. Your minimum score, your lowest score, was achieved by Mrs. Plum's class, and that was a 51. Okay, for D. More percentages. They love asking percent questions when it comes to these box and whisker plots. What percent scored from a 51 to 67 in Mrs. Plum? So 51, that was the minimum, to 67, that's right about Q1. So what percentage is that? That's one group, one section. So that's 25%. What percent scored from 65 to 70 in Mr. S's? 65 is their minimum to 70. Oh, that's only one section or half of the 50 section, making it 25%. And now I just want to pause for a sec. And even though, get rid of that highlighting, even though this bluish green part here is 25%, just like that purple is 25%, remember, the fact that those are different sizes has nothing to do with the number of data values, and it has everything to do with how spread out those data values are. So this purple space here still has the same number of data values as this blue space up here. The purple ones are just spread out further, whereas the blue ones are more condensed. So just remember that. All right, wrapping this up relatively quickly because we still have stuff to do. Which class had the greater variation in scores? You need to explain which one you're going with. Mrs. Plum has the greater variation, and that's simply because her box plot is larger. It has a wider range. It has a longer box plot. Mrs. Plum, because the box plot is longer, aka it has the greater range. That's what it means to have a longer box plot. It means your range is greater. Last but not least, which class had the higher median? So again, I'm showing what those medians are. Mr. S's median, Mrs. Plum's median. That's Q2. So Mr. Scarlett's was 78. And Mrs. Plum's Q2 was 84. So, which class had the higher median? Mrs. Plum with 84. Notice how I showed the work. I didn't just write random Mrs. Plum. I showed what each median was and then chose it.